Good afternoon, everybody. We've got a microphone that works very well today to hear. Welcome to the Harrisburg Rotary Club today. And again, glad to see you here. And we'll start off, as we always do, with the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. I'm thankful for one of my go-to guys. Don's going to fill in today with My Country 'Tis of Thee.
My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. And learn my father's side, land of the every mountain side,
Now let's turn to the Pledge of Allegiance. Today's invocation is by Paul Lehman.
If I get to join me in prayer. God, we thank you for this food and the nutrition that it provides our bodies and for the service that we can do in our community. During this season of Advent, I am reminded of hope and we just pray for hope as individuals, for this club and the work that we do in our community here, for our nation, as well as hope corporately around the world. Thank you for being a God of hope. Thank you also that we can learn about our school division today, and I pray your blessing on our speaker as we learn about the good schooling and education that happens in our community. In Christ's name I pray.
Thank you, Paul. Dan, come on up and introduce our speakers. And yes, Dan and I are still showing our face, even though we're Ohio State fans and we got blown up by Michigan.
they got lucky breaks though.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, we have four guests with us today. We have Whit Minifree from Bridgewater. Needs no introduction. Welcome, Whit. We have Oscar Scheikl, who's going to be our speaker, so we'll learn more about his background in a while. We have Michael Weaver here. He's a guest of Dennis Brubaker. Dennis, do you want to say some words about Michael?
I didn't have anything prepared, but glad to have Michael here. I'm taking Maynard's place, the other Brubaker, and I might just mention that knowing Michael for quite a few years, and it's his dad that is responsible for me being here in Virginia. So I'm very thankful to the Weaver family.
Very good. That's heavy here, Michael. We also have Joe Hackman here. He's a guest of Les. Les, you want to say a few words about your guest?
Joe will become a member here in a few weeks, but Joe is the foundation manager of the MRC Foundation.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody.
I think I'm correct too, but Mike, your dad was a member of this club at one point, I believe, for many years. So, yes. Well, it's interesting as I think about when I look at this club, I just thought I would share a couple of thoughts about my experience this past week. I was invited as a guest to the Winchester Rotary Club with some business associates up there. And that club is also a very large club. They're at about 150 members. But their attendance is about exactly the same. Talking to their club leaders, they're about 50, and we're inching up to 50 that actually attend. They usually have 5 or 6 virtual, and ours varies some. But I dressed with my blazer, and I figured this is the Winchester Club, which traditionally is a very formal area, but they're more casual than we are. So there's like one other jacket in the crowd. I know here we often have 6 or 8 or 10. So again, you're welcome to dress as you are to Rotary, but found that interesting. I do have one family of Rotary. Sad to announce that Lynn Dively's mom passed away just in the last day or two. She was actually going to present some more to us today on Well of Hope, but she'll do that later after the first of the year. But just remember Lynn and your thoughts and prayers, maybe send her a note. Any other family of Rotary? I do want to mention a couple of announcements that, as Noah shared last time, bring your food items in here.
Yep.
And Noah and Quentin will then take care of getting them out of here because the Elks didn't want us to become a storage center. But please remember, let's help those in need in this holiday season coming up. Also, just a quick reminder that for most of you that know this, no meeting on December 26th or January 2nd. I just want to start getting that word out. So with that said, we will have Rodney come up and introduce our honored speaker for today.
We're very glad to have Oscar with us today. So Oscar is no stranger to this club nor to the larger community. So I think most of you know Oscar already, but in case you don't, I do have some history for you here. Which I'm going to go through relatively quickly, but I think that most of you know that Oscar was born in Salzburg, Austria in 1966, graduated high school in 85, completed mandatory military service in the Austrian Army before enrolling at the University of Salzburg. In 1992, moved to the United States, enrolled in James Madison. He graduated magna cum laude from James Madison with a history degree in 1994. In the fall of 95, he began his career as a high school social studies teacher at Broadway High School. 5 years later, he became a U.S. citizen. That same year, he transferred to the central office as an administrative software implementation specialist. He earned his MS in computer science from James Madison and his PhD in education from the University of Virginia. In 2011, he was appointed Director of Information Management for the school division. In 2017, he was appointed as the division superintendent. He has two daughters, Sophia and Claire, who are graduates of Virginia Tech and UVA. So he has a divided house. And I think we were talking once, I think 2 years you've been married now. So so in his free time, he enjoys traveling. And I think you guys know that he enjoys jumping out of airplanes. So welcome, Oscar.
Thank you, Rodney. It's always great to be here. It's interesting, right? When you look at that biography, one of the most contentious discussions, at school board meetings, oftentimes centered around what it means to be from here. And so, the easy attack is always, well, he's not from here. And based on my biography, obviously that's true in some sense. But then when you look at how long I've lived here, it's easy to make the argument too that one, sometimes people who attack me for not being from here actually haven't lived in Rockingham County as long as I have. And secondly, there's something to be said for someone having made a choice to live in a place, right? Because I didn't have to live here. With a degree in computer science or my graduate work at UVA, I could live anywhere on 2 continents for a fact because I have dual citizenship. And so I always say, this is why I'm here is because by choice, I care about this community. It is a conservative community. We all know that. And so when education in Rockingham County is being attacked for being too liberal, I can point to the fact that from the very beginning, teaching at Broadway High School, that most people don't view Broadway as this bastion of liberalism, right? That I was able to work with families there have an amazing connection with the ag community. There's so many good things going on in the community. But more recently, it really has gotten contentious. There's some good reasons for that. One has to do with the pandemic. Certainly, people lost a lot of control for a year and a half, and the board meetings where we even talked about masks last year at Spotswood High School. When you drive up to a school board meeting and the first thing you notice is 15 deputy cruisers, then that's not exactly the environment you want to be discussing education in. And there are so many important topics in education that we need to talk about. Still getting students more hands-on learning opportunities. I've always said, there's some mottos that I really that speak to me. The FFA motto, learning to do, doing to learn, earning to live, and living to serve. And that's really what we want to focus on, is how can we get kids to have application level learning. We know that students have, and the community at large, really, there are significant mental health needs, and we need to address those. And we've done a lot of work in that area. We know that secondary students really should start school a little bit later in the day. Just for that time period of their teenage years, really, their internal clock does change. And so we want to do that. We want to be really serious about how we evaluate education programs. And so there are a lot of things going on. We work with Harvard University on a project called Harvard Proving Ground, where they are conducting one of the most in-depth analyses of how students learn math and how they do in Rockingham County, and to then say what strategies might work to improve math outcomes for all students. Because many students believe they're either good in math or they're bad in math or at math, and it doesn't really work that way. And so it's a really interesting project, because there are ways where even working with students and teachers on their mindset and how they approach it, how to provide just-in-time delivery of content when you move, even if you weren't successful on one topic. What do you need to understand this next topic? It's so critical for us after the pandemic too. Where are the kids? They're all over the map. What does each child need to make them successful for the task ahead? And so working with Harvard there, we're one of 60 school divisions out of 10,000 in the country, selected by the National Superintendents Association as a demonstration site for trying different things in education when it comes to staffing models, when it comes to working in different ways where students can take classes that combine multiple subject areas. We have a number of these fusion classes. At Broadway High School, they did a presentation a couple months back. They combine geometry and construction. It's natural link there. When you build things, that you have to understand the underlying math concepts. We have one that combines ag and Spanish. We have some that combine world history with literature. I mean, there's so many neat combinations, and to see how you can do that so that the material isn't just memorized, that students may draw connections and that they look at the world around them in that way. All our CTE programs, where we again run a farm up in Broadway, where the meat then ends up in school lunches. So I was involved butchering some hogs and then turning them into sausage, and then that ends up on the school lunch. And so there's so many ways our kids really learn about the world around them. And that's where the focus should be. And it's interesting when you ask teachers and when you really talk to parents and when you talk to students, that's actually what's on everyone's mind. But there has been this just constant stream of misinformation and of anger. Some refer to it as angertainment. I usually call it manufactured outrage about things that distract us really from our core mission. And that's what we've seen at these school board meetings. Now, I understood to some extent kind of that just people were mad about kids having to go to school in masks. I didn't understand it based on what I had learned, but at least there was something there, and we would have 200-300 people at the meetings, but it's just continued. And what's really tragic about it is that it can really harm public education. There's a real danger. And if you want to know what that may look like, there are examples. Spotsylvania County just recently, they flipped the board, and now they have a superintendent in Spotsylvania County who has absolutely no background in education. He's an attorney. A year ago, he posted on Facebook that the best thing people can do is move their kids out of public schools. And now he's the superintendent. And the reason he's superintendent is because he happens to run the new school board chairs nonprofit, and they're just friends. And no concept of homeschool his kids. And so that, that's what we see in many cases with more and more school board candidates who either homeschool their kids or have their kids in private school, and then want to bring those values, to public school. And it's just not the same thing. Right? There's a real good reason for people to decide to homeschool their children or to send them to a private school that's constitutionally protected, all of those things. But public school is for everyone. And we don't say, oh, no, you know what, you didn't quite make the cut, you can't come here. It's for everyone. And it's a really important piece of democracy. Right? And so when we talk about this kind of constant drumbeat, it goes to crazy lengths. And I'm not sure, I'm just going to ask whether any of you have heard of this. But have any of you heard about litter boxes being placed in public schools for kids who identify as animals? Raise your hand if you have. Look at that. Look at that. How crazy is that? I can now just be cleared up, not happening, right? I was saying we have 1,000 kids in a high school. Right? That means there are at least 1,000 cell phones in a high school. And yet I've yet to see a picture of one, right? All over the country. And that's what we have to deal with. I've had multiple calls from people complaining about it. You're putting litter boxes in schools, yet it's just not happening. Right? And it's just, but that's what we have to battle. There was a state senator in Nebraska that talked on the floor of the Senate there about how these schools are not putting litter boxes into schools. I said, if I really wanted to rile people up, I'd say, yeah, and we're using, that colored litter because that also tests people for COVID, right? Then it really would well. I want to do that, right? So I have, I can make fun of it, but it really points to just a tone in the conversation. Nothing we say, people simply don't believe what we say. And the first question I do always ask is it the truth, right? And when we talk about what this country can be like, based on all these promises, when we look at history, all the promises, in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, is it good for everyone, right? Does it improve this country? And so sometimes we have to have uncomfortable conversations, and we're not allowed to have them, apparently, because, if you tell people that you're focused on the truth, whether something is fair to all or whether it's beneficial to all concerned, you'll be called a Marxist. And it's a simple label. It's complicated philosophically, right? How all that works, but that will happen. And there are so many topics that we can talk about that have local connections. School integration, for example. There's a last year I coached soccer at Spotswood, so I told the girls at halftime one time. I said, "Hey," and first they looked at me with these wide open eyes and said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Did you know that in 1954 the Supreme Court said," this was a halftime speech. I said, in 1954 the Supreme Court said that separate schools are inherently unequal and schools have to be integrated. And they're like, okay, it's halftime against Harrisburg. And I said, and did you know that Rockingham, it took 10 years to integrate schools, so 1964. And it happened at the Park School over in Parkview because the Mennonite community allowed a family from Farmville, where they shut down public schools, to come to Parkview and live there. And because of redlining, right, families were prevented from living anywhere where they would have gone to school with white kids. And so then the family, the Ewell family, basically wanted to go to school at the Park School. And the principal, John Bender, said, called central office, and they said, well, there's a rule, you have to call Richmond. And of course, they would have denied it. And Bender said, not going to do that. Right? Not going to do that. I will not send these kids home. And the kid said, oh, okay, Scheikl, coach, that's really interesting, but what does it have to do with us? And then I said, look at the center ref. His name's Chuck Yule. He's one of the kids that integrated Rockingham County Schools. Right? And we did talk about strategy for the second half too, but local people we know, people we have in the community, and a white principal, and all these things. So when we're accused of, making white kids feel bad for being white, that's not how this works. And so there's so many amazing connections in this community. Skyline Drive being built, and all the people being pushed out of the mountains, and lost their homes, which explains why when you send a park ranger to East Rockingham High School as a guest speaker, there's still tension there with some of those families. They're still alive. And so there's so much amazing history that we can benefit from. But we get attacked for it as, critical race theory and all these other things. And so I believe and in general, by the way, when you ask people in the United States, NPR and Ipsos did a poll just recently nationwide. How do you feel about public education? There are significant concerns, right? Everyone's concerned about public education in the United States. There are problems, we need to do something. And then you ask people, how about your school? How about your child's school? And all of a sudden, 80% of people believe that their child's school is amazing and their child's teacher is really good. And it's across party lines, right? There's no significant difference between Democrats, Republicans. Parents actually like how their child's school operates and how their child's teacher works. And so how can it be both, right? Public schools are terrible, but 80% of people think their child's school is actually really good. And so it is manufactured. There are lots of things we can do better, lots of improvements we can make, areas where we can work, but the tone of the conversation needs to change. And so, as you may know, I'm only going to be superintendent until June 30. I'm leaving the position at the end of the school year. But one of the last projects that I undertook is in response to all of this. And so there was actually, and we didn't base it on this, but in 1971, Durham public schools, they were still segregated in 1971. And so they created this community dialogue framework where they invited people to talk about school integration. And there's a movie about it, The Best of Enemies. And it's about this KKK leader and the civil rights activist. And they participated in that community dialogue. And then at the very end, they actually, in that group, voted whether they thought schools should integrate. And it passed by one vote. And the deciding vote was the leader of the local KKK. And so this has been done before. And I wasn't aware of it. I just heard about it recently. But a year and a half ago, I asked two teachers that had been in Rockingham County for a long, long time, who won't agree on anything politically, who may even go to the other side of the street so they don't have to talk to the other one, maybe, right? And I said, hey, we need to do something about this. And they both agreed to sit down. And then we added the former school board chair and a parent who had spoken critically, but always respectfully at school board meetings. And then I said, but we can't do this on our own. And so we hired Catherine Barnes, who works at the Center for Justice and Peace Building at EMU. You always hate it when I say this, but it's true. She used to teach conflict resolution in services at the United Nations headquarters. That's the level of expertise we have in the community. And so I said, if she can bring the Palestinians and Israelis to the same table, maybe it might just work for Rockingham County. And so she is facilitating the whole process with other graduate students from EMU. And so what we did was, in that small group of 7, we first had some initial discussions. How do we bring civility back? And then we invited 23 community members from across the political spectrum, conservative, pastors, LGBTQIA allies, all across the board, and had 4 facilitated sessions to talk about topics in education. And of course, other contentious issues come up. But what you find really quickly is when you ask what the strengths of the community are, what the strengths of the school division are, what the challenges are, and how we can get there, all of a sudden, like all these tables where this is being discussed come up with the same stuff. It's the same stuff that the students come up with. And it's the same stuff that parents will tell you too. Once you get past the just outrage of the day. And so 2 weeks ago, we expanded that to 80 people. And so we had 80 people at roundtables, facilitated, again, every single one was facilitated by someone trained in conflict resolution. And the same thing happened. I wasn't quite sure because there was none of the prep work for those people. They just came for the evening. And it was amazing to see. And so 80 people, again, there were sheriff's deputies there, that not as participants at the time, not to protect us. And it's amazing when there's a communications protocol, you only speak for yourself, you're going to be respectful, and so on. Like there's a protocol on how we talk to each other, what you can actually accomplish. And so we will have 2 more of those in January and February. And in the meantime, there are also all the 11th grade students. We wanted to make sure it's not just AP kids or dual enrollment kids. Everyone is involved at the 4 high schools, 400 students who are talking about the same topic. And so they just had 3 of the sessions last week. And it's exactly the same stuff that the parents come up with again, and the community dialogue group. And so then in April or May, we will have an open event where anyone in the community who agrees to respectful dialogue can be there. So we expect that to be 400 or 500 people. And hopefully that is one of the ways we can get dialogue back to respect, to talk about what is actually accurate. Bring evidence when you make a claim and talk about the things that our community needs, that our kids need, that our parents need. And then we can make schools better in a meaningful way. There are all kinds of good questions about what our students learn about, but it has to be done in a respectful way. And so for me, that was the most important thing to do this school year, and is to get back to talking to each other like human beings and to not demonize people. When we look on social media, right, you're quickly called a rumor, a devil, a demon. That's the terminology that's being used. And when we get away from that, then there's a much better chance that we can really get back to improving schools. And that's the goal. And if we can get to that community event by April or May, then I will be a very happy man to see, that a community can come together to improve education. And so for all of you, there'll be plenty of advertising about that. I hope those of you who are connected to Rockingham County consider participating in it. Love to have a wide range of people there. And so that invitation stands, and I do hope you can join us for that. And I'll leave you with that. And if you have any questions, I'll gladly entertain those. Yes, sir.
What's next for you and your family?
Oh, yeah. So I had actually decided 3 years ago, I told board members that this would be my last contract. And I signed the last one actually 4 years ago almost. I was going to spend half the year in Austria and half the year in the United States to spend time with my mom. I hadn't really spent quality time with her since 1992. She was younger then than I am now when I moved to the United States, and she had suffered from COPD. So that was the plan. We visited in Austria. We visited her in Austria in July. Second day of the visit, she passed away. So that plan ended up being out the window. So the first conversation was, do I now extend my contract, right? But there's some calm that needs to come for the next school board election. And so I decided to follow through with my retirement, but I'm not retiring. So there are a couple of things I've always wanted to do. One is certainly travel more, but the other one is I wanted to go back and teach. And there's one option, and that is I'll go back and teach social studies at the high school level. There's another option, of course, and that's higher ed. We'll see what happens, but I'll certainly stay connected to education and teach in some capacity. If it's higher ed, I'd love to teach school law. Be a nice combination of what I used to study and then of course my current role. School law is a critical piece of the superintendency, and then maybe do some special projects, but we'll see. But yeah, staying connected to education, and it'll be at least for the immediate future in this area. Yes.
What do you think some of the greatest challenges are recruiting and retaining great teachers?
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Okay, sure. What are the greatest challenges in recruitment and retention of educators? And there are a couple of factors. One, we always hear about pay. Certainly, although that's not the most important factor, right? People, because education pay, is better than it used to be, but it's still not maybe where it needs to be. It's always tricky when you look at, comparisons where they say, oh, Virginia is 50th when it comes to teacher pay compared to people with similar degrees. Yeah, but it's Virginia, right? You have Northern Virginia with enormous salaries, some of the richest counties in the country, partly because of consulting firms tied to the Pentagon, and then some high-tech firms as well. When you look at median teacher pay, so Virginia is about the 12th wealthiest state, and our median pay, so half of the people make more and half make less, is also 12th. Right? So average pay we're a little bit lower, but so pay is one of it. But critical factors are respect, and it's respect from the community, from politicians. I've said this publicly too. It doesn't help when the first step a new governor takes, and I'm not sure where who gave him the idea, is to create a tip line. Here's a tip line for teachers that are doing controversial things. I've said, imagine if the first step was to say, hey, here's a tip line for dirty cops because we saw 2 police officers or 3 mistreat someone. Now we're going to create a statewide tip line for dirty cops. I'd be the first one complaining about that too, with Sheriff Hutchison at my side, right? Because it creates an image of the profession. When the new social studies standards that come out, that were developed by 18 months with parents, with educators, and they throw them all out and rewrite them overnight, you don't show respect to the profession. And then teachers need more time. They need time to collaborate. They need time to plan really good activities for the classroom. We tried to do that, again, 5 days before COVID shut us down. The board had approved a shortened school day. Many other countries, school ends at 1:30 because it gives teachers then time to plan for the next day, and it means focusing on the most important content. And so I think, again, it is paid to some extent, but mostly people are leaving the profession because of lack of respect, lack of support, lack of mental health resources, and lack of time. Those are the key ones. Yes, sir.
You spoke just now of standards. Is that coming from the Department of Education? And does the Department of Education help or hinder what you'd really like to do in the classroom?
The Department of Education, for a long time, we referred to as the Department of No. We would suggest, innovation, and they had their own department with people who were on board with a lot of things we wanted to try. Then inevitably it was like, well, we got to bring the policy department in, and then they said, no, you can't do that. There is certainly that more flexibility is needed. So, for example, for a long time it was you had to have certain amount of seat time, so you couldn't get a credit unless you had this many 140 hours. And of course, we know learning isn't dependent on the hours you sit in the chair; it's the quality of what you do. And so there need to be some assessments to determine whether someone accomplished goals both in content knowledge, but also in skills. It's applying that content knowledge. And so, yes, the Department of Education certainly has a lot to do with that. But again, there is some flexibility now. One amazing project that's hopefully happening, Governor Youngkin, and I've said, I will criticize, but also give credit where credit is due. Not only would they push for the Virginia Literacy Act, where teachers in second and higher ed are now required to base their reading programs on the science of reading, which is by far the most aligned with cognitive science and how people actually learn to read. But he also implemented a multi-million-dollar program for lab schools. And so we've actually worked with JMU for 2 years now to develop a lab school model where in each of the high schools we could have a school within a school. And so there, some of the state restrictions would be softened and we can experiment with different approaches to teaching. And we're hopeful because our project already been mentioned in the media as one that will get some funding. We're hopeful that next year, East Rock and Broadway will have 2 lab schools, 25 to 50 kids in each grade level. Well, freshmen and sophomores, because they're more of the same schedule. You want to do it across the board, but trying out different things. Again, where content is integrated across subject areas, where a lot of it is project-based. And so those are certainly things that are also coming from Richmond. So it's always a mix. And then we just need to advocate for more flexibility and stringent evaluation. Check whether something works and then allow that, right? Rather than saying, here's what we've always done, so we'll keep doing what we've always done.
Time for one
Yes,
more.
sir.
Just have a comment and an affirmation for the way you have outlined the listening sessions and the talking sessions within the county to get people to talk with each other without shouting at each other. And I think that's a model that most of us could learn from. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oscar, thank you. Any last comments you want to make?
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and again, you've all the times that I've had a chance to speak here, you've been a wonderful audience, and I know I'm preaching to the choir on many of these things, but we need that participation from people who already believe in these things, right? Because that's where all that comes from anyway. Thank you. So thank you for everything you do to make this community respectful.
Thank you, Oscar. Once again, it's just a privilege to hear from community leaders, and thanks, Oscar, for not giving up on us as a community, just keep fighting the good fight and helping us learn together. My question was going to be, and I can ask you later, is could we structure the board meetings differently, like from learning from that? But my number one assignment as Rotary President is don't take people to 105. So we are adjourned.